The morning sun breaks through the mist as I kneel in the rich soil, fingers working methodically through the garden I have spent 2 years cultivating. Earth clings to my skin, the smell of growth and possibility rising from the freshly turned ground. This land represents everything I worked for: freedom from grocery store prices, connection to the earth, and my own little piece of sustainable paradise. When I purchased this corner property in Oak Ridge Hills, the real estate agent emphasized its southern exposure and natural water drainage. Perfect for gardening, she had said, not knowing how seriously I would take those words. After 15 years living in apartment buildings with only potted herbs on windowsills, this quarter-acre lot represented my chance to truly grow roots. My grandfather taught me to garden as a child, his weathered hands guiding mine as we planted corn and beans on his small farm. Those memories stayed with me through college and my early career in accounting, spreadsheets by day, seed catalogs by night. When the opportunity for remote work arrived, I immediately began searching for a place to fulfill my dream of sustainable living. The neighborhood seemed perfect with its quiet streets and walking trails. Modest but well-maintained homes lined curved roads named after trees. Children rode bicycles along sidewalks, and neighbors waved as they collected mail. What I failed to notice were the pristine lawns, identical landscaping, and the watchful eyes of the Oak Ridge Hills Homeowners Association. Within my first month, I converted half of my front yard into garden beds. The soil needed amendment, so I hauled in compost and worked it deeply into the clay. The back fence became support for climbing beans and peas. Along the driveway, I installed raised beds for herbs and salad greens. Each weekend brought new plantings: heirloom tomatoes with names like Cherokee Purple and Brandywine, zucchini, peppers, and even a small apple orchard with 3 dwarf trees. Their president, Margaret Wilkins, first appeared at my door 3 months after I moved in. She wore beige slacks and a perfectly pressed blouse, a clipboard clutched against her chest. Her silver bob remained motionless despite the spring breeze. "We have had complaints about your landscaping," she said, lips pursed as though the word tasted sour. "The Architectural Control Committee has not approved these changes." I explained my sustainable gardening approach, even offering her a basket of fresh strawberries. Her smile never reached her eyes as she declined. "There are forms to submit, approvals required. Oak Ridge Hills maintains certain standards." I nodded politely, took the forms, and promptly forgot about them, absorbed in the miracle of watching seeds transform into food. My vegetables thrived under careful tending, and some neighbors began stopping by for gardening advice and fresh produce. Elderly Mr. Chen from down the street became a regular visitor, telling me my tomatoes reminded him of his childhood in rural Taiwan. By my second summer, the front yard garden had expanded to include pollinator-friendly flowers that attracted bees and butterflies. The apple trees produced their first small crop. My refrigerator overflowed with produce, and I began giving away weekly baskets to neighbors. Even the mailman received cucumber and tomato sandwiches during his route. I did not see the storm brewing in the monthly HOA meetings I never attended. My growing agricultural oasis became a target for those who believed vegetable gardens belonged behind houses, not showcased in front yards. Margaret had already cited 3 neighbors for unauthorized bird feeders and 1 for a decorative windmill. Her clipboard filled with notes about my property, photographs taken from various angles documenting my thriving ecosystem. One evening, as sunset painted my garden in golden light, I noticed Margaret standing at the edge of my property. She was not alone. 2 board members flanked her as they pointed at my raised beds and fruit trees. Their expressions darkened when they saw me watching. They turned away quickly, heads bent in conversation. Something in their posture, the secretive huddle of their bodies, sent a chill through me despite the warm evening air. The metallic clang of steel posts being driven into earth stopped me in my tracks as I rounded the corner to my home. 3 men in gray work uniforms systematically installed metal fence posts around the perimeter of my entire garden. My property, my food. For several seconds, I could only stare, brain struggling to process the invasion occurring in my front yard. "Excuse me," I called out, quickening my pace. "What are you doing on my property?" The foreman barely looked up when I demanded an explanation, simply handing me a work order with the Oak Ridge Hills HOA letterhead. My hands trembled holding the paper that authorized containment of unauthorized agric. Cultural activity pending compliance review. The signature at the bottom belonged to Margaret Wilkins, HOA president. "You cannot do this," I said, voice rising. "This is my private property. You have no right to fence off my garden." The foreman shrugged, turning back to his work. "Just following orders, ma'am. Take it up with your homeowners association." Inside my house, I frantically searched for my property documents while watching through the window as chain link rose higher around my tomatoes and bean trellises. The phone call to Margaret went straight to voicemail. My message, teetering between rage and disbelief, demanded an immediate explanation. An hour later, my doorbell rang. Margaret stood there with two board members, Fred Blackwell, a retired banker with thinning hair and perpetually disapproving expression, and Donna Mitchell, who owned the largest house in the neighborhood and spoke exclusively in a whisper. "We have called an emergency meeting this evening regarding your property violations," Margaret announced, not bothering with a greeting. 7 p.m. at the community center. "Those workers are trespassing," I protested. "They have no legal right to build on my property." Fred cleared his throat. "Actually, the HOA covenant gives us authority to remedy violations. Section 8, paragraph 12 clearly states." "I want those fences removed immediately," I interrupted. "My plants need water, they will die." 7 p.m., Margaret repeated, turning away. "All concerns will be addressed at the meeting." The emergency meeting that evening in the community center became a nightmare of condescension. Approximately 15 residents sat scattered throughout the room, most looking uncomfortable to be there. The board members sat elevated on a platform behind a long table, their positions creating a courtroom atmosphere with me as the defendant. Section 12, paragraph 7 clearly states that ornamental plantings must not exceed 20% of visible yard space, Margaret announced to nodding board members. Furthermore, food production facilities are restricted to rear properties only, not to exceed 10% of total lot size. I stood at the podium, clutching my folder of documents. "My garden was established before that rule was added last year," I countered, pulling out my closing papers and original HOA regulations. "This amendment was passed 8 months after I moved in. My garden was already established." Margaret smiled thinly. "Grandfather clauses apply only to permanent structures, not plantings. The current regulations apply to all properties regardless of when certain features were installed." "This is about property values, not rules," I said, looking around the room. "My garden is well-maintained and productive. Several neighbors benefit from it." "Vegetable gardens belong in backyards, out of sight," Donna whispered into her microphone. "Front yards must maintain aesthetic uniformity for consistent property valuations." For nearly an hour, I presented documentation, photographs of other non-conforming yards, and even testimonials from neighbors who appreciated my garden. The board remained unmoved, hiding behind selective enforcement of constantly changing regulations. "The fence will remain until compliance is achieved," Margaret concluded, gaveling the meeting closed. For 3 days I watched through that fence as my vegetables withered under the summer sun, unable to reach them with water or harvesting tools. Ripe tomatoes fell and rotted. Bean plants yellowed and curled. The apple trees dropped their immature fruit. My calls to local authorities resulted in shrugs and suggestions to work it out with your HOA, as if this were a simple neighborhood squabble rather than theft of my food security. On the third evening, I stood at the edge of the fence, fingers wrapped around the metal links, watching the sun set on my dying garden. A tear slid down my cheek, more from anger than sadness. This was not just about plants. This was about autonomy, sustainability, and the right to use my own property for something meaningful. The city planning office smelled of old carpet and resignation. This marked my 5th government office visit in 7 days, each one ending with the same sympathetic but useless response. My folder of documentation had grown thicker with each stop: property deeds, original HOA covenants, photographs of my garden before and after fencing, even signatures from neighbors who supported my gardening efforts. HOAs have broad authority over aesthetic concerns, the balding clerk explained, sliding my documents back across the counter. His eyes held genuine sympathy, but his hands remained tied. State law gives them significant enforcement power through their covenant agreements. But they fenced off my property, I protested. They are preventing me from accessing my own land. He sighed, leaning forward slightly. Look, I understand your frustration, but these covenant agreements are essentially private contracts. The city cannot interfere unless there is a clear violation of municipal code. Outside, the summer heat had intensified. My garden continued dying behind that illegal fence while I navigated a maze of jurisdiction questions and bureaucratic buck-passing. The police called it a civil matter. The county property assessor suggested mediation. A junior attorney I consulted quoted a retainer fee that exceeded my monthly mortgage. My next stop was the office of City Councilwoman Ramirez, who represented our district. Her assistant made me wait 90 minutes before ushering me into a small conference room where the councilwoman appeared briefly between meetings. Agricultural rights in residential zones are complicated, she explained, glancing frequently at her watch. I sympathize with your situation, but HOAs operate as private entities. My hands are tied unless they violate specific ordinances. She promised to make a phone call to someone who might help, but the business card she handed me, for yet another municipal department, suggested her interest ended the moment I left her office. At the County Agricultural Extension office the following day, I slumped in the waiting area, flipping listlessly through pamphlets about pest control and soil management. My garden would need complete rehabilitation if I ever regained access. Some plants would be lost entirely. Fence trouble, the woman beside me nodded toward my property photos peeking from my folder. I looked up, surprised by the direct question after days of bureaucratic evasion. She was perhaps 50, with silver-streaked dark hair and intelligent eyes behind stylish glasses. "How did you know?" I asked. The desperate look, the folder full of documents, the soil under your fingernails despite the business attire. She smiled, extending her hand. "Elena Vasquez, environmental law specialist. I have seen that look before." Over coffee in the building cafeteria, Elena explained that recent state legislation protected urban agriculture initiatives as part of climate resilience planning. She pointed to specific sections in my photographs. Native pollinator plants, water-conserving irrigation methods, heirloom crop varieties, she noted. Your garden qualifies as an urban agriculture conservation project under State Bill 1742, passed last year. My heart raced with the first glimmer of hope in days. The HOA claims their aesthetic requirements supersede my property rights. Elena shook her head. The HOA has not just violated your property rights, they have potentially broken state environmental protection laws. Conservation initiatives receive special protection, even against HOA covenants. For the next 3 days, I barely slept, researching precedents and downloading state agricultural codes. Elena connected me with resources explaining exactly how to document the environmental benefits of my garden. The more I learned, the stronger my case appeared, but legal wheels turned excruciatingly slowly. I filed complaints with the State Environmental Protection Office and the Agricultural Conservation Board. Each submission required detailed documentation, photographs, and specific citations of applicable laws. My dining room table disappeared under maps, legal printouts, and sustainability impact statements. My filed complaint joined hundreds of others in processing queues, while summer heat baked my imprisoned garden into submission. The state offices estimated 4 to 6 weeks for initial review, followed by investigation periods that could stretch for months. Meanwhile, Margaret made a point of walking past my house daily, clipboard in hand, seemingly cataloging the withering plants as though their decline validated her actions. Once our eyes met through the window. The small smile that crossed her face sent rage coursing through me, not hot and explosive, but cold and calculating. One afternoon, while dropping off additional documentation at the HOA office located in our community clubhouse, I found myself alone in the building. The receptionist had stepped out, leaving me waiting in the lobby. Through the plate glass windows, I could see the expansive structure of the clubhouse, its meeting rooms, small gym, and administrative offices. My eyes traveled upward to the flat, expansive roof that stretched across the entire building. Something stirred in my mind, a fragment of an article I had read during my research binge. I took out my phone and quickly snapped several photos of the rooftop from different angles, an idea forming that would transform both my situation and the entire Oak Ridge Hills community. While delivering another futile letter to the HOA office, something caught my eye that I had never truly noticed before. The sprawling community clubhouse with its flat, sun-drenched roof stretched nearly 60 feet in each direction. I paused in the parking lot, mentally calculating square footage as an idea formed. That vast, unused space sat perfectly positioned to capture sunlight throughout the day, unshaded by trees or nearby structures. That evening, hunched over my laptop, I discovered our state's aggressive environmental protection initiative offering substantial tax credits for urban beekeeping operations. The program specifically incentivized placement atop commercial and community buildings to maximize urban pollination. The website featured success stories from across the state, apartment buildings, schools, and community centers that had installed rooftop apiaries. Honeybee populations have declined by over 40% in the last decade, the site explained. Urban beekeeping initiatives provide essential habitat while improving agricultural yields in surrounding areas. The more I read, the more excited I became. The state offered significant tax incentives, up to $20,000 annually, for qualifying operations. Properties hosting such initiatives received substantial property tax reductions. Even more importantly, the legislation specified that environmental conservation programs received protection from local restrictions, including HOA regulations. 3 days later, I sat across from Miguel Rodriguez, master beekeeper and sustainability advocate, at a local coffee shop. His weathered hands traced the photos of the clubhouse roof I had taken. "Their roof is perfect," he confirmed, nodding slowly. "Southern exposure, protected from wind, accessible. You could support 30 hives up there easily." "Is it difficult to get started?" I asked. Miguel smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "The learning curve is steep, but not impossible. The state program includes mentorship and support for new beekeepers. I could help you through the certification process." The meeting with the county environmental commissioner revealed the crucial detail I needed. Under State Law 447.9, designated environmental conservation, efforts superseded HOA restrictions when properly permitted. Communities could not prevent conservation initiatives that qualified under state sustainability programs. "The law is quite clear," Commissioner Jordan explained, reviewing my application materials. "Once certified as an environmental conservation project, your beekeeping operation would receive state protection, even against HOA regulations." My dining room transformed into command central as I meticulously documented every detail, obtained specialized permits, and enrolled in an intensive beekeeping certification course. Evenings and weekends disappeared into research and planning. I learned about hive management, honey production, and bee health. The State Environmental Office provided detailed guidance for application materials. During this time, I also began quietly reaching out to neighbors who had experienced similar conflicts with the HOA. Susan Blake, whose butterfly garden had been cited for excessive wildness, became an early ally. Robert Chen, whose solar panel installation had been repeatedly rejected, offered his engineering expertise. Jamal Washington, a high school biology teacher who had battled the HOA over his composting system, brought scientific credibility and documentation skills to our growing coalition. 4 neighbors whose gardens had also suffered under Margaret's reign joined my planning sessions, bringing expertise in construction, environmental law, and social media documentation. We moved carefully, quietly, building community and legal support before the HOA realized what was happening. "We need to document everything impeccably," Susan advised during one evening meeting. no procedural errors they can exploit. Robert examined the structural plans for the clubhouse roof. The load-bearing capacity is more than sufficient for the hives. I can certify that officially as a licensed engineer. Jamal created educational materials explaining the environmental benefits of our planned initiative. Community education will be crucial for support, he explained. People fear what they do not understand. With my application approved by the State Environmental Office, I received official notification that my Oak Ridge Hills Pollinator Initiative qualified for priority implementation and substantial tax credits. The State Environmental Office assigned Diane Ortega as our project liaison, providing official backing and resources. Your initiative meets all our criteria for priority conservation status, she explained during our first official meeting. The decline in pollinator populations represents a critical environmental concern. The same day we received final approval, my garden fence mysteriously developed a section that could be easily opened, Robert's handiwork during a midnight operation. I was able to salvage some plants and collect seeds from others. More importantly, I now had documentation of the garden destruction to include in future legal filings. As we finalized preparations, I felt both nervousness and determination. The HOA had taken my garden, but they had unwittingly given me something more powerful, a perfect opportunity for environmental justice that would benefit the entire community. Dawn painted the sky pink as our convoy of vehicles pulled into the clubhouse parking lot. Miguel directed his apprentices with quiet efficiency as they unloaded the first 10 beehives from their specially equipped truck. The wooden boxes, painted white to reflect heat, contained thousands of honeybees that would soon become the newest residents of Oak Ridge Hills. I arrived early to supervise the placement of signage and documentation. Every detail needed to be perfect, every regulation followed exactly. We had one chance to execute this correctly, knowing the HOA would scrutinize every aspect looking for violations. Remember everything by the book, I reminded everyone. We follow every regulation to the letter. I posted our permits and authorization documents in weatherproof cases at eye level near the roof access ladder. The bright yellow state environmental protection flags fluttered from each corner of the operation area, marking this as official conservation space. The methodical thunk of equipment being positioned atop the clubhouse continued for 2 hours as Miguel and his team secured the hives and established the queen bees in their new homes. Robert supervised the installation of water sources and native flowering plants in containers that would provide initial food sources. Jamal documented everything with photographs and video, creating a continuous record of our compliance with regulations. Susan coordinated with 3 other neighbors who formed a perimeter watch, alerting us via text message when board members were spotted approaching. At 9:15 a.m., my phone buzzed with a warning text from Susan. Silver Merceds approaching fast from east entrance. The methodical thunk of equipment being positioned atop the clubhouse continued for 40 minutes more before a silver Merced screeched into the parking lot. Margaret Wilkins emerged, face contorted with rage, followed by 3 board members in various states of disbelief. Her perfectly coiffed silver hair seemed to bristle as she took in the scene before her, the trucks, the equipment, and most infuriatingly, the state environmental protection flags marking official conservation space. "What do you think you are doing?" she shrieked, advancing toward the ladder where Miguel and his assistant were descending after positioning the final hive. I intercepted her with a clipboard of my own, containing copies of State Environmental Protection Statute 447.9, our approved permits, and the official designation of the rooftop as a protected pollinator habitat. For once, I was the one with the clipboard and the authority. "Good morning, Margaret. We are installing the Oak Ridge Hills Pollinator Initiative, a state-certified environmental conservation project." I kept my voice steady and professional despite the adrenaline coursing through me. Her finger jabbed at the papers, voice rising to attract attention from gathering neighbors. "This is vandalism, trespassing. I am calling the police right now." Fred Blackwell sputtered beside her. "You cannot just put beehives on community property. This is outrageous. Actually, we can, I replied calmly. State Environmental Protection Law 447.9 specifically protects certified conservation initiatives, which supersede local restrictions including HOA regulations. All permits have been properly filed and approved. Donna Mitchell whispered urgently to Margaret, whose face flushed deeper red as she punched numbers into her phone. You will remove these immediately or face legal consequences. I had anticipated this reaction and prepared accordingly. All documentation is available for review. The State Environmental Office has assigned Officer Diane Ortega as project liaison. Her contact information is included in the paperwork. 15 minutes later, 2 police officers arrived simultaneously with Diane Ortega, State Environmental Protection Officer. She wore the official uniform of the department, projecting authority as she calmly verified our documentation while Margaret sputtered increasingly desperate objections. Officers, I want these people removed from HOA property immediately, Margaret demanded. They have no authorization to install these dangerous structures. Officer Ortega stepped forward, her official identification badge prominently displayed. Actually, Ms. Wilkins, I have reviewed all documentation thoroughly. This operation is fully permitted under State Environmental Code Section 447.9 as an officially designated conservation project. One police officer, reviewing the permits, nodded in agreement. Their paperwork appears in order, ma'am. Officer Ortega continued, her voice carrying to the gathering crowd of curious neighbors. I should also inform you that any attempt to interfere with a state-sanctioned environmental initiative carries potential felony charges. The state takes pollinator protection very seriously. The growing crowd of neighbors watched in silence as Margaret retreated, phone already pressed to her ear as she frantically called the HOA attorney. Fred followed close behind, while Donna remained, watching the operation with narrowed eyes. Miguel approached me as the HOA board members huddled near their cars. The hives are successfully installed. The queens are establishing their new homes. Within days, the worker bees will begin foraging throughout the neighborhood. By sunset, 20 beehives hummed with activity above the clubhouse, where the HOA board had so smugly denied me access to my garden. The white boxes caught the fading sunlight, glowing against the darkening sky like beacons of change. State environmental protection flags snapped in the evening breeze, marking the space as protected territory beyond HOA control. As darkness fell, neighbors continued to gather, asking questions about the bees and the program. I explained the environmental benefits, the state tax incentives, and the positive impact on local gardens. Many expressed surprise and interest, especially when I mentioned the property tax reductions that would benefit every homeowner in the community. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in weeks, lulled by the knowledge that 20,000 honeybees now worked tirelessly above the heads of the very people who had tried to destroy my garden. Summer heat shimmered above the clubhouse roof, where the bee colony flourished beyond expectations. From my vantage point in the community park, I could see Miguel moving calmly among the white boxes, performing weekly inspections. The bees had adapted quickly to their new environment, foraging throughout the neighborhood and thriving in the carefully planned rooftop habitat. Inside the community center below, I conducted the first of what would become weekly educational workshops about beekeeping and sustainability. 23 residents attended this initial session, their curiosity overcoming initial fears about the rooftop apiary. Honeybees typically forage within a 3-mile radius, I explained, gesturing to a map of our neighborhood with the clubhouse at its center. This means every garden in Oak Ridge Hills benefits from improved pollination. Children pressed their noses against the community center windows during these presentations, fascinated by observation hives and honey extraction demonstrations that Miguel helped me prepare. Their questions came rapid fire. How do bees make honey? Why do they live in boxes? Do they have names? The queen bee can lay up to 2,000 eggs per day, I told one wide-eyed 8-year-old. She will live for several years, while worker bees live only about 6 weeks during summer. Neighborhood skepticism transformed into enthusiasm as residents connected pollinator health to their suddenly thriving gardens. Susan reported her tomato yield had doubled. Robert's fruit trees produced more abundantly than ever before. Even residents who had initially supported the HOA position began attending workshops as their gardens flourished under increased pollination. The HOA board, however, remained determined to remove the beehives. Their attorney filed an emergency injunction claiming public safety concerns, which the court promptly denied based on our state certification and safety protocols. A second attempt citing property use restrictions similarly failed when our environmental protection status was presented. The HOA board meeting attendance swelled from the usual 12 regulars to standing room only as neighbors demanded explanations for the mounting legal fees appearing on their monthly statements. The atmosphere grew tense as Margaret attempted to maintain control of the increasingly fractious gathering. These legal actions are necessary to protect property values and community safety. She insisted as residents examined the financial statements showing attorney fees exceeding $15,000 in just 6 weeks. My property value increased when my vegetable yield doubled, one elderly resident countered, and my grandchildren love learning about the bees during the weekend workshops. 3 failed injunctions later, the HOA treasury had hemorrhaged nearly $30,000, while our beekeeping initiative received an additional $15,000 state grant for expansion. The State Environmental Office featured our project in their newsletter, bringing positive media attention to Oak Ridge Hills as a forward-thinking, sustainable community. Meanwhile, my garden, finally liberated, underwent intensive rehabilitation. The fence had been removed after Officer Ortega pointed out that interfering with a complementary agricultural project to a state-certified conservation initiative could trigger additional penalties. Neighbors volunteered weekends helping me replant, rebuild trellises, and install a community composting station that would provide natural fertilizer for gardens throughout the neighborhood. Margaret continued issuing citations for everything from unauthorized bird baths to improperly stored trash cans, but residents increasingly ignored them, instead attending my sustainability seminars held pointedly during scheduled HOA meetings. Attendance at official HOA functions dwindled while our environmental workshops expanded to include composting techniques, water conservation, and native plant identification. The first honey harvest coincided with the summer solstice. Miguel supervised as we carefully extracted honey frames, uncapped the combs, and watched golden honey flow into collection tanks. The community center kitchen transformed into a processing facility where neighbors learned extraction techniques and bottling procedures. Tables stretched across the community green space later that day, laden with dishes featuring vegetables from my recovered garden and honey from our rooftop hives. Children ran between activity stations learning about beeswax candle making, seed saving, and pollinator identification. Adults sampled varieties of honey wine that Miguel had prepared from last season's harvests. The celebration grew as sunset approached, with families spreading blankets on the grass for picnic dinners, while a local string quartet played classical music near the clubhouse. The sense of community felt tangible. Conversations flowed between neighbors who had previously only nodded in passing, children played together across property lines, and gardening tips were exchanged over shared meals. Margaret and her remaining board supporters watched from the periphery, uninvited and increasingly irrelevant to the community they once controlled. Their tight cluster at the edge of the celebration stood in stark contrast to the mingling, laughing crowd. State environmental officers presented our project with an award for urban conservation excellence, photographed beneath the Oak Ridge Hills Pollinator Initiative banner hung across the clubhouse entrance. The certificate came with an additional grant for educational programming and habitat expansion. As night fell and families gathered to watch fireflies emerge in the community garden, I caught Margaret staring at me from across the lawn. For a moment, our eyes locked. I raised my honey-filled glass slightly in acknowledgement. She turned and walked stiffly toward the parking lot, clipboard conspicuously absent for the first time I could remember. 1 year later, our rooftop apiary had expanded to 50 thriving hives, producing over 2,000 pounds of honey annually. The white boxes gleamed in the morning sun, arranged in neat rows across the clubhouse roof. A viewing area with protective glass allowed visitors to safely observe the colonies in action, a feature particularly popular with school groups who arrived weekly for educational tour. The state environmental tax credit program rewarded our community with nearly $40,000 in reduced property assessments distributed equally among all residents. The financial benefit appeared clearly on property tax statements, converting even the most skeptical homeowners into supporters of our initiative. My annual property tax decreased by $320, Robert announced at a community gathering, holding up his tax statement. The beekeeping program literally pays us to host it. Quarterly environmental impact reports documented dramatic increases in local crop yields, butterfly populations, and native plant diversity. The University Agricultural Extension Office established permanent monitoring stations throughout our neighborhood to study the effects of urban beekeeping on suburban ecology. The autumn HOA board election transformed our governance with record turnout, electing 7 sustainability-minded residents including myself as vice president. Susan Blake became president, Robert Chen treasurer, and Jamal Washington community education director. The clubhouse meeting room overflowed as residents participated in the first truly democratic HOA election in Oak Ridge Hills history. Our first official act removed 17 restrictive landscaping rules, replacing them with simple guidelines emphasizing water conservation and habitat support. The new regulations encouraged native plantings, pollinator gardens, and food production while maintaining reasonable aesthetic standards through proper maintenance requirements rather than plant-type restrictions. Our goal is to balance individual expression with community cohesion, Susan explained at our first board meeting. We believe these guidelines support sustainability while maintaining the attractive appearance of our neighborhood. Marg. Erit listed her house for sale the following week, unable to adapt to the community she no longer recognized or controlled. The real estate listing emphasized proximity to award-winning environmental initiatives without mentioning her role in opposing them. Few neighbors attended her farewell gathering, though many quietly celebrated her departure. Where my fenced-in garden once stood, we created the Oak Ridge Teaching Garden with rotating demonstration plots, weekend workshops, and school field trips. Children from the local elementary school planted their own sections, learning about food production while growing vegetables for the community food bank. This garden space belongs to all of us, I told a reporter from the local newspaper who featured our transformation in a front-page story. What began as a personal space has evolved into community resource. 3 neighboring HOAs sent representatives to study our transformation, taking detailed notes on our beekeeping infrastructure and modified governance approach. Our community became a model for others seeking to balance property values with sustainability initiatives. The County Agricultural Extension Office referred visitors to us as an example of successful integration of agriculture into suburban settings. The State Agricultural Department featured our community in their annual report, highlighting how one contested garden evolved into a model of urban sustainability. The governor visited during Earth Week, presenting our community with an award for innovative environmental leadership. Standing atop the clubhouse on inspection day, watching bees navigate between hives and flowering plants below, I reflected on the strange journey from garden prisoner to community leader. The recently installed plaque beside the roof access commemorated our project's beginning, its dedication reading, "From conflict grows opportunity, from restriction, freedom, from defiance, community." The honey produced by our rooftop apiary won first place at the state fair that autumn. Bottles bearing the Oak Ridge Hills honey label appeared in local grocery stores and farmers markets, proceeds funding additional sustainability initiatives throughout the neighborhood. Below, Margaret's replacement moved into her former house, an environmental science teacher whose first question during the property showing had been whether backyard chickens were permitted under the new HOA guidelines. Susan had smiled broadly while handing her the revised community regulations that included specific provisions for properly maintained henhouses. As I closed the hive I had been inspecting, a school group gathered below waved enthusiastically. I waved back, honey-sticky gloves catching sunlight. The garden where my journey began now extended throughout the entire community, victory sweeter than any honey we produced.